They say hindsight is 20/20, but looking back now, I realize the signs had been there all along. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married for nearly 8 years, and while we'd had our share of ups and downs, I thought we were solid. Or at least I thought I did. In recent months, though, things had started to change. It began subtly: Sarah's shift in mood, the way her phone never seemed to leave her side anymore, the late nights with vague excuses about work events or catching up with friends. She'd always been the more social one between us, and I tried to chalk it up to stress, a need to unwind with friends, or just the typical ebb and flow of a long relationship. But something in my gut told me this wasn't normal. One Friday night, she came home late again, her face flushed, looking like she'd had too much to drink. I asked her how her evening was, and she gave me a tired smile, saying she'd just been out with the usual crowd. She leaned in for a kiss, but something felt off. The spark that usually connected us was missing. Her eyes darted away, and I noticed a strange tension, something unspoken lying heavy in the air between us. I tried not to dwell on it. I told myself she was just tired, that everyone deserves some privacy, and that I was just being paranoid. But the thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. Each new excuse she made, every last-minute plan, every forced smile, it all seemed to fuel the fire of doubt growing in my mind. It was around that time that I started noticing my own health taking a turn. I was constantly exhausted, feeling worn down and drained in ways I couldn't explain. I chalked it up to stress at first. Work had been intense, and I wasn't getting any younger. But then came the night sweats, the constant ache in my muscles, and a persistent fever that just wouldn't quit. I could tell something was wrong, but I had no idea just how wrong. One evening, I brought up my concerns with Sarah, hoping she'd reassure me, offer some comfort or advice. Instead, she brushed it off, saying I was just overworked, that I needed to rest more. Her dismissal only heightened my unease. We'd always been open about our health, our worries. This new indifference from her felt like another crack in our foundation, something I couldn't quite piece together yet. As I lay awake that night, I began to piece together every odd moment, every late-night text she claimed was from a friend, every time she seemed more distant than before. I didn't want to believe it. The thought of her being unfaithful was painful, but the symptoms I was feeling, the strange distance, and her secrecy felt like pieces of a larger puzzle I wasn't yet ready to confront. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. And soon, I'd find out that the illness I was facing was more than just stress. It was a symptom of something far more painful, a betrayal that would shake me to my core. As days passed, my symptoms only worsened. Each morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The headaches grew sharper, and an unrelenting fatigue weighed me down. I told myself I'd visit the doctor soon, but there was this odd reluctance, maybe a lingering hope that whatever it was would just pass. Part of me didn't want to face the possibility that something serious could be wrong. And, truthfully, the distance growing between Sarah and me had already drained so much of my energy. It felt like we were sharing a house, not a life. One evening, I noticed Sarah's behavior shift again. She was quieter than usual, almost nervous. Her phone buzzed several times that night, and each time, she would glance at it with an expression that quickly shifted from annoyance to worry. When I asked her about it, she brushed me off, saying it was just work stuff. But I knew better. There was something else behind her eyes, a fear she didn't want me to see. I tried not to pry, but as I sat there on the couch, watching her glued to her phone, I felt a spark of anger. I had been holding in so many questions, shoving down so many doubts for the sake of keeping peace, yet here she was, withdrawn and hiding things from me. The tension between us was reaching a breaking point. That night, as she slipped into bed without a word, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of every strange behavior, every uneasy feeling that had built up over the past few months. The phone calls, the late nights, her brushing me off, none of it made sense, and I was done ignoring the gnawing worry eating away at me. A few days later, I decided to make a doctor's appointment. Something inside me felt off, and I wanted answers, whether it was stress or something else. The doctor ran a series of tests, including blood work, and asked questions about my symptoms. I hadn't realized how unusual they all were when taken together, how they pointed to something potentially serious. I could feel my heart pounding as he spoke, trying to mask the worry beneath his professional tone. When the results came back, the doctor sat across from me with a look that was far from reassuring. "I'm afraid there's something you need to know," he began. He explained that my results showed signs of a serious infection, one that wouldn't have developed out of nowhere. My mind was reeling. I asked questions, grasping for any answer that would make sense of it all. That was when he gently suggested I might have contracted it through intimate contact, a detail that immediately sent my mind into a spiral. I hadn't been with anyone other than Sarah. It wasn't possible. And yet, the results in front of me couldn't be argued away. I was shocked, feeling a hollow ache in my chest that went beyond the illness. If I was infected, it could only mean one thing: Sarah had brought this home. The realization left me cold. My mind flashed back to every late night, every nervous glance at her phone, every excuse I had accepted because I wanted to trust her. I had given her the benefit of the doubt time and time again, even when everything inside me screamed that something was wrong. But now I couldn't deny it any longer. I left the doctor's office that day feeling numb, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a heavy stone. There was no way to justify this. No explanation that could undo the truth. She had made a choice, and now I was paying the price for it. When I got home, I found her in the kitchen, pretending everything was normal, acting as if we hadn't been drifting apart for months. And in that moment, every ounce of trust, every shred of patience I had held onto for her, shattered. I knew there would be a reckoning. She might have hidden the truth from me, but she couldn't hide from the consequences. I stood in the doorway, watching Sarah as she went about her evening, moving through the kitchen like it was any other night. She seemed almost oblivious, humming softly, her face unbothered, as if everything between us was fine. And maybe that was the worst part, her casual, unworried expression, while I was barely holding it together. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Clearing my throat, I spoke her name, barely recognizing my own voice, thick with tension and disbelief. She looked up, surprised by the tone. But then again, it had been months since we'd had a real conversation, so maybe she had no idea what was coming. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Her face shifted, a flicker of something, maybe guilt or maybe just annoyance. She put down the plate she was holding, folding her arms across her chest, almost defensive. That look, the walls she put up in an instant, only fueled my anger further. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice clipped. I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. The betrayal felt like a fresh wound I was still reeling from, and yet, here I was, face to face with the person who had caused it. "I went to the doctor," I began, watching her closely. For the briefest moment, I saw her flinch, a tiny crack in her calm exterior, and that was all the confirmation I needed. She opened her mouth, likely to brush it off or spin some excuse, but I cut her off. "I know, Sarah. I know what's going on. I know that you've been hiding something from me." Her face paled, and I could see her mind racing, trying to find a way out of this mess. But there was no escape now. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice thin, almost shaky, though she tried to mask it with indignation. I let out a hollow laugh, one that felt foreign, cold. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. My test results. The symptoms I've been ignoring for weeks. Everything points to one thing, Sarah." Her eyes shifted, darting around the room like she was trying to find an escape. But we both knew the truth now. She didn't respond, and her silence was as good as a confession. I couldn't believe it, after everything, she wasn't even going to try to deny it. I felt a swell of anger, sharper than before, mixed with a deep sadness I hadn't prepared for. "How long?" I asked, my voice low. She looked down, guilt flashing across her face. Her hands trembled as she fidgeted, a silence stretching between us that only made everything worse. I didn't mean for it to happen," she finally muttered, her voice barely audible. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You risked everything for a mistake. You kept this from me, put my health at risk, and now I'm paying the price for your mistake." Her eyes filled with tears, but I had no sympathy left to offer. Any warmth I once felt for her had been drowned in betrayal and anger. "I was going to tell you, I just didn't know how," she whispered, but her words felt hollow, too little, too late. I stepped back, the weight of everything settling on me. This was the woman I had trusted, the person I had built a life with, and here she was, standing in front of me, guilty and broken, but still unable to take responsibility for what she had done. And for that, I felt nothing but contempt. "We're done, Sarah," I said, my voice firm. "I can't forgive this. I can't look at you the same way ever again." Without another word, I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there with the silence and the consequences of her choices. After that confrontation, the reality of my marriage's collapse hit me harder than I expected. The life we built together, the memories, the laughter, all of it was tainted now, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. The next few days felt surreal. I went through the motions at work, avoided friends, and isolated myself, trying to process the betrayal. Sarah sent messages, left voicemails, and even showed up at my door. Each time, she begged for another chance, insisting it was a one-time mistake. But I didn't respond. Each attempt only deepened the wound, a constant reminder of the betrayal I'd suffered. Trust wasn't something that could be mended so easily, and she'd shattered it beyond repair. A part of me wanted to stay in denial, to pretend it never happened and try to go back to how things were. But I knew that wasn't possible. I'd spent years investing in a relationship built on loyalty and love, and in an instant, it had all unraveled. There was no going back. I finally decided I needed to make some concrete changes. The first step was moving out of the house. Our home had been a sanctuary, a place where I felt safe and grounded, but now it only felt suffocating, a constant reminder of the person who had broken my trust. I started looking for a new apartment, a fresh start, somewhere I could begin again without the ghosts of our past haunting me. Packing my things was bittersweet. I sorted through old photos, souvenirs from trips, and mementos from happier times. Each item held a memory, a reminder of the life I'd thought we shared. But with each box I packed, I felt a little lighter, a little more in control of my future. I was leaving behind the parts of my life that no longer served me, and while it was painful, it was also freeing. In the meantime, I spoke to a lawyer. I wanted to understand my rights, to know what the process would look like if I decided to file for divorce. The thought of a legal battle was exhausting, but I knew I needed to protect myself. Sarah's choices had already affected my health and well-being. I couldn't allow her to have any more control over my life. As I prepared for the next chapter, I also realized that I needed support. I reached out to a few close friends, people I trusted, and shared what had happened. Their reactions ranged from shock to anger on my behalf, and their support gave me strength. They reminded me that I didn't have to face this alone, that there were people who genuinely cared about my well-being. One night, as I sat alone in my new, empty apartment, I allowed myself to finally feel everything I'd been holding back, the anger, the betrayal, the grief. I knew healing would be a long process, but in that moment, I promised myself that I would come out of this stronger. Sarah's actions had hurt me deeply, but I wouldn't let them define my future. I was ready to move forward, one step at a time, leaving behind the pieces of my old life and embracing the possibilities that lay ahead. Settling into my new apartment marked the beginning of my recovery journey. Although it was sparsely furnished, with only the essentials, it felt refreshing, a blank slate. I wanted this new space to symbolize a fresh start, free from the tangled web of lies and deceit Sarah had spun around me. Each day was a mix of small victories and difficult emotions. Some days, I felt strong and confident, while others brought back waves of bitterness and resentment. At work, my colleagues noticed my shift in mood. Some of my closer friends there gently probed, offering their support without prying too deeply. It felt strange to be on the receiving end of sympathy, but it was also a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. I began opening up more, even finding humor in small things, and though it was far from easy, I was slowly starting to piece myself back together. Over the following weeks, I delved into activities I hadn't pursued in years. I joined a fitness club, took up an interest in cooking, and even tried a meditation course. My new hobbies brought purpose to my days, grounding me and giving me reasons to look forward. And as I spent time investing in myself, I realized how much I'd let go of in the marriage, the parts of myself that I'd sacrificed or ignored in my attempts to make things work. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to reach out, leaving messages that swung between apologetic pleas and angry accusations, blaming me for the distance between us. I kept my responses minimal, if at all, knowing that engaging with her would only reopen wounds I was working hard to heal. Our divorce process had begun in the background, managed by my lawyer. It was a painful process, but every step felt like shedding another layer of the past that had held me captive. One evening, while unpacking a box of books, I came across a journal I'd kept years ago. Flipping through the pages, I found entries from the early days of my marriage. The optimism, the love, the hope I'd felt back then seemed like a distant memory. But reading my own words, I was reminded of the person I had been before all of this. I had been happy, resilient, and full of dreams, and I realized I wanted to find my way back to that person. With this newfound perspective, I set a new goal for myself, to rebuild not just my life, but my identity. I was no longer defined by Sarah's betrayal or the pain she had caused me. I was free to redefine who I was, what I wanted, and how I would live my life. As weeks turned into months, my daily routine became a source of stability and strength. I was proud of the life I was building, free from the weight of betrayal that had once consumed me. Each day I focused on my own healing, slowly allowing myself to be more open, more present, and even, at times, hopeful for what lay ahead. My newfound focus extended to my friendships, and I spent more time with old friends who reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart. They had a way of making me feel grounded, and our laughter felt like a balm for my lingering scars. At one point, a friend suggested joining a local group dedicated to hiking and nature walks. I hesitated at first. After everything, it felt strange to just enjoy life. But with their encouragement, I decided to go for it. The hikes became my refuge. Out in nature, surrounded by peace and quiet, I felt my thoughts calm and the constant anxiety I'd carried begin to dissipate. Slowly, I started to connect with new people in the group. They knew nothing about my past, and for the first time in a while, I could just be myself without explanations or history hanging over me. Among the group was a woman named Lisa. She was kind, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, though there was nothing forced or rushed about it. Her presence felt warm and familiar, a sharp contrast to the guarded, tense dynamic I had grown accustomed to with Sarah. We'd talk during our hikes, sharing stories, and laughing at silly things. Our friendship was effortless, and as time went on, I found myself looking forward to seeing her again. But I was cautious. I hadn't forgotten the hurt, the deep wound that betrayal left behind, and I didn't want to rush into anything. I knew I had to take things slowly, out of respect for both myself and her. For now, it was enough to enjoy our moments together and let things unfold naturally. One of the hardest lessons I learned during this time was that I couldn't fully heal without finding some level of forgiveness. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought I was past it, anger would creep in, reminding me of what had happened. But as I spent more time reflecting on my life, I began to realize that holding on to resentment would keep me chained to the past. Forgiving Sarah didn't mean excusing her actions or forgetting what she had done, it meant freeing myself from the bitterness that had been my constant companion. I wanted to move forward, to find peace, and that meant letting go of the anger I held onto so tightly. I spent hours journaling, processing my thoughts and emotions. I even started seeing a therapist, who helped me work through my feelings and rebuild my sense of self-worth. In time, I began to feel lighter, like a weight I had been carrying for too long was finally being lifted. Each day, I found it easier to breathe, easier to laugh, and easier to imagine a future where I could trust again. With a clearer mind and a stronger heart, I felt ready to fully step into my new life. My friendships deepened, my work flourished, and I continued to take time for myself, nurturing my interests and passions. Lisa and I grew closer as well, though we continued to take things slowly. She was patient, understanding, and supportive, everything I hadn't known I needed until I met her. Our relationship blossomed quietly, free from pressure or expectations. I appreciated her kindness, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. She knew about my past, about Sarah and the pain I'd endured, but she never pushed me to discuss it more than I was comfortable with. Instead, she stood by my side, letting our connection develop naturally. Her warmth and compassion helped me rediscover the joy of companionship and trust. Months later, I received a letter from Sarah. It was an apology, though it felt empty, devoid of true remorse. She acknowledged her actions and expressed regret, but I could tell she was still caught in her own patterns, unable to see beyond herself. I read the letter, folded it, and tucked it away, not out of anger, but out of peace. I had already moved on. Sarah was a chapter in my life, one that had shaped me, but I no longer needed her apology to find closure. As I let the past settle, I looked ahead with a sense of excitement and possibility. I was grateful for every lesson learned, every step I'd taken toward healing, and for the new people in my life who reminded me of the good in the world. My heart felt lighter, and I knew that whatever came next, I was ready to embrace it fully, without fear. As the seasons changed, so did my perspective on life. I had learned to embrace the challenges that came my way, and through each obstacle, I found new strengths I never knew I had. The connection with Lisa deepened, moving beyond friendship into something more profound. It felt healthy, nurturing, and, most importantly, free from the shadows of my past. I felt like I was finally allowing myself to be vulnerable again. One evening, after a long hike, Lisa invited me over to her place for dinner. She prepared my favorite dish, and we talked for hours, sharing stories about our childhood, dreams, and fears. The laughter flowed easily, and with every passing moment, I felt the walls around my heart crumbling. In that cozy living room, surrounded by flickering candlelight and the warmth of her presence, I felt a shift within me. I was ready to take the leap, to let love back into my life. I reached across the table and took her hand, looking into her eyes as I confessed how much she meant to me. I never thought I could feel this way again, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But you've shown me that it's possible. Her smile lit up the room, and in that moment, I realized I had not just moved on, I had found a new beginning. As my relationship with Lisa flourished, I knew I had to face the past head-on. I decided to confront Sarah one last time, not out of anger, but to seek closure. I reached out to her, and after some hesitation, we agreed to meet at a cafe we had frequented together. Sitting across from her, I felt a swirl of emotions, anger, hurt, but also a strange sense of calm. Sarah looked different, and as we spoke, I realized she was struggling to reconcile her actions with the person she used to be. She shared her own journey since our separation, but it felt like an echo, a shadow of the life we had once built together. Seeing you move on has been hard for me, she admitted, her voice trembling. I've been working on myself too, trying to understand why I did what I did. In that moment, I found compassion for her. I knew I would never forget what she had done, but I also understood that we were both on our own paths toward healing. We talked for hours, revisiting memories both good and bad, but the focus was always on moving forward. When we parted ways, I felt lighter. The closure I sought was finally within my grasp, and as I walked away, I knew I had taken another step toward complete healing. With the past behind me, I focused on building a future with Lisa. We traveled together, explored new places, and shared dreams we had once thought impossible. Our bond deepened, built on trust, respect, and a mutual understanding of the journeys we had taken to find each other. One afternoon, we hiked to a beautiful overlook, the sun setting behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the landscape. I turned to Lisa, my heart full, and took her hands in mine. "I want you to know that you've brought joy back into my life," I said. "I can't imagine my future without you in it." Her eyes sparkled with warmth, and I could see the happiness reflected back at me. "I feel the same way," she replied softly. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." In that moment, I made a decision. I wanted to commit to this new love, to embrace the future that lay ahead. I felt a rush of excitement and fear, but I knew I was ready. Months passed, and as our relationship grew stronger, I began to think about the next step. I wanted to propose to Lisa, to ask her to be my partner for life. I wanted to create a future built on the love and trust we had nurtured together. I spent weeks planning the perfect moment, carefully choosing a ring that represented not just our love, but the journey we had taken to get there. Finally, I decided to take her back to that same overlook where we had shared so many beautiful moments together. On the day of the proposal, the weather was perfect. As we reached the overlook, I could feel my heart racing with anticipation. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and turned to her. "Lisa," I began, feeling the emotions swell inside me. "You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me that love can be beautiful again. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked at me, and for a moment, I held my breath, anxiety creeping in. But then, she smiled brightly and nodded, "Yes. Yes, I will." We embraced tightly, the world around us fading away as we celebrated this new chapter together. As we began planning our future together, I felt a sense of joy I had thought was lost forever. The wedding was a celebration of love, resilience, and the journey we had both undertaken to find each other. Friends and family gathered, witnessing the vows we exchanged, promising to support and cherish one another through every season of life. As I stood there, looking into Lisa's eyes, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The pain from my past had shaped me, but it no longer defined who I was. I had taken the lessons learned and transformed them into a foundation for a healthier, happier life. In the months that followed, Lisa and I created a home filled with love, laughter, and support. We embraced every adventure together, cherishing the simple moments, cooking dinner, watching sunsets, and dreaming about the future we would build as partners. Years later, as I sit on our porch watching the sunset with Lisa, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for everything I've experienced. The challenges I faced, the pain I endured, and the love I found were all integral parts of my journey. We had built a life together, one rooted in trust and understanding. The shadows of my past still lingered at times, but they no longer held power over me. I had learned to embrace happiness, to let love into my life fully, and to appreciate every moment we shared. With Lisa by my side, I knew that whatever challenges life threw our way, we would face them together, not just as a couple, but as a team. We were ready for whatever came next, together.